and welcome to the MAPS Canada webinar series, Examining the Psychedelic Renaissance, Season 2. My name is Shannon Smedella, and I'm your host for the series. We are beyond excited to bring to you Season 2 as we had an extremely potent and successful Season 1 full of amazing speakers, researchers, and of course, attendees like you. As you can see, we've expanded our speakers for the season to include over 25 doctors, researchers, luminaries, ministers, shamans, elders, activists, and much more. Each of these speakers and panels will be showing up to share important information and their take on the psychedelic renaissance. You've heard me say it before, and I'll continue to say it in each episode, we are in the middle of a psychedelic renaissance. This world, as we know it, is going through a huge transition. Mental health issues are on the rise, MDMA on the verge of approval as a treatment for PTSD, psychedelic therapy is on track to become the next major breakthrough in mental health care. MAPS Canada, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, is on the forefront of conducting studies to develop psychedelics into safe and legal medical treatments since its formation. To conduct and publish scientific research and education supporting the beneficial use of psychedelic medicines, MAPS Canada relies on public donations and fundraising initiatives. The funds raised from this webinar series will go to fund that research, and if you would like more information on that, please see mapscanada.org. So some housekeeping items for today. We'll start with a conversation and talk from medicine hunter Chris Kilham. After that, we'll start our Q&A session and make sure and vote up your questions as we will be prioritizing those. And also let us know where you are tuning in from in the chat today. We have lots of people saying where they're from. Who we have here? Nanaimo, BC, Gibsons, Pemberton. We have Vancouver, lots of West Coast here. We have Toronto, there we go, Cambridge, Waterloo, Calgary. We have Colorado, Santa Cruz, Westminster, more from Vancouver, Nova Scotia, Kitsilano, Atlanta, Georgia, False Creek, Burnaby. So welcome to everyone where you are tuning in from. This is a very exciting episode that we have for you tonight. So tonight we're going to be speaking with Chris Kilham. Chris Kilham is a medicine hunter, explorer, lifelong yogi, psychedelic advocate, and media personality. He has investigated medicinal plants among indigenous people globally for decades, from Siberia to the Amazon to Congo. He's the author of 15 books, including the international bestseller, The Five Tibetans. And Chris has appeared on over 2,000 radio and 500 TV programs. The New York Times calls Chris part David Attenborough and part Indiana Jones. So tonight we're going to talk about methods of yoga and meditation and how they can provide powerful support and navigational aid in the psychedelic landscape. Conversely, psychedelics can help to enhance one's yoga practice as a result of profound and radical spirit immersion. Drawing upon 53 years of psychedelic journeying and 50 years of daily and yoga meditation practice, Chris Kilham described the potent fusion of psychedelics and yoga and how to harness this power. Discover the place where psychedelics and Kundalini meet. So this is going to be super exciting. Help me welcome Chris Kilham.
Thank you to MAPS Canada for having me on. It's great to be here. I'm glad that we have a good group, and I always appreciate the opportunity to share knowledge when, with like-minded folks. I'm only sorry that I can't see everybody's faces. I really miss that, being in front of a live audience. But I think, given this particular time during COVID-19, this is what we have, and I am happy to see people enthusiastically joining in.
We're super excited to have you back, Chris. So I do have a few questions here, and I was wondering if we could start off just by talking about your background and history in both psychedelics and yoga, because you've been immersed in both of these for a very long time. So if you can give us a little background there, that would be wonderful.
Sure. I'd be happy to. I first got involved in psychedelics when I was a teenager. It was 1967, and I was at a boarding school, and I had never gotten high before. I mean, on anything, and except for beer, much younger. And I took a popular LSD at the time. It was called White Lightning, and it was a 250 microgram tab of LSD, and I had a brilliant experience and loved it. Realized that it was extraordinarily powerful. I understood right away that there was so much I didn't know and didn't understand, but I had a glorious experience. And that led me to investigate more LSD and a bit of peyote and psilocybin and what was available at the time. And eventually, I also wound up smoking cannabis and getting involved with that in a somewhat significant way. About 3 years after that, I was initiated into transcendental meditation at a meditation center in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with two very close friends of mine. And I don't know if you know how the initiation ceremonies work, but you have to have fresh flowers. You have to bring fresh
Mhm.
flowers, and we didn't really have much much money, so we went to the local very beautiful cemetery, Mount Auburn Cemetery, and I hopped over this enormously high and pretty dangerous iron fence, kind of like what you'd see in a bad scary Victorian movie, and went around to graves and apologized to people and thanked them and got flowers and brought them to the initiation. And we were all happy, and I really felt that in some ways we were actually honoring the dead rather than just letting those flowers kind of die out in the open. At least that was my justification. But that very quickly led me to regular yoga practice. I actually started practicing yoga out of a book. Um, I was shown a few things by a family friend, and I really took it up enthusiastically. And I was still doing some psychedelics at that time, was also still smoking cannabis. And so for about a year and a half or so, I did that. And eventually I wound up just so in love with yoga and meditation. I was doing a lot of meditation, very deep meditation and yoga every day. Um, I had heard about Kundalini Yoga, and I just kind of became fascinated by it. And I wrote Gopi Krishna, who had written a popular book on Kundalini at the time, and said, "Hey, look, I'm looking for Kundalini Yoga. Wonder if you can help me out here." And he basically sent me a letter saying, "Whatever you do, don't do that. It's dangerous. It's insane. The teachers are all charlatans. You'll go crazy or die." And so, based on that really enthusiastic recommendation, I said, "Yeah, man, I want to know about this stuff." Um, so, to make a very long story appreciably shorter for all the right reasons, I wound up moving into a place that readily became an ashram, and we practiced yoga every day. And I was there for just a little shy of 5 years. And we did an enormous amount of yoga, usually a minimum of 4 or 5 hours a day. But then I was also teaching classes at universities and colleges and jails in the area. So I was averaging 5 to 8 hours a day for a few years, and doing hours a day of breath of fire. And, you know, we were all really jacked up on yoga. And by that time, I was not consuming any psychedelics. I was not consuming any cannabis. But prior to that time, I had had an awful lot of experiences with LSD in the 3 intervening years leading up to my initiation and then after. And so I'd gotten kind of a taste of what was possible with the combination of yoga and psychedelics. But in fairness, I was so new still and relatively inexperienced, especially compared to now, that I was just in the early stages of seeking. But suffice it to say that I eventually left the ashram and continued yoga practice, although I threw out some inauthentic methods and I took on other methods. I was very fortunate to have a popular radio program that was kind of a new age program in Boston, and I would interview yogis and lamas and psychics and sages and mystics of all different kinds. And I went all over the place doing this. And as a result, I met many people who shared methods with me. And So that's a very little bit about my background, but I also, as you know, and some people online may know, I also developed a very significant interest in medicinal plants. In one of the in one of the scriptures that I like, a Tibetan yoga scriptures, is the yogi must know the medicines and the omens. And I dove very deeply into medicines, plant medicines of all different kinds, and eventually developed a career around that, and have spent the last, well, 26 years of real concentrated global travel, but really about 40 years, if you go back to some of my earliest research, investigating medicinal plants around the world. So that kind of somewhat helter-skelter background brings us up to the present.
That sounds so interesting, and especially about the ashram down in, that was Joshua Tree,
No, actually,
I
that
believe.
was in that was in Western Massachusetts. That was not far from where my wife Zoe and I live today. And we were, I mean, we were truly bug-eyed fanatics. We were absolutely insane yogis. Sometimes people would come to stay overnight at our place, and they literally were frightened away by our morning practice. Uh, some of them were horrified. Literally, just got in cars and drove off. You know, it's like, I don't want any part of this. It's too much. But it was, in many ways, it was very good training, because after that, any practice, I mean, I practice about 2 hours a day these days and meditate at night. Any practice after that was just easier. But it gave me a tremendous foundation, a really wonderful foundation in yoga.
That is super exciting to hear. And in your topic, you talk about and you mentioned that a yoga practice can help you navigate the psychedelic landscape. Did you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I called this the lotus and the vine, because much of my more recent times with kind of combining some of the methods I know in yoga with psychedelics have happened in malokas during ayahuasca ceremonies. So thus the vine. But this is applicable to LSD. It's applicable to peyote. It's applicable to San Pedro. It's applicable to mushrooms. And it's also applicable to psychedelic quantities of cannabis. I had one of my great earlier experiences, once I'd really had a bunch of years of practice, behind me, sort of wind in my sails, was in January of 1984, when I was in Kathmandu, Nepal, and I went to a temple, the Machendranath Temple, which is an old, old temple. They're about 800 years old, and to hear musicians sing holy songs at night. And um, when I went in there, they looked at me, and they motioned to come over to them, and they invited me to smoke ganja with them prior to them, singing holy songs. And I did. And it was good and wonderful and strong, and the atmosphere was mysterious and remarkable, and their music turned out to be very evocative. And I wound up doing this every night for 9 nights while I was there, and basically having these ecstatic cosmic trips with the music and cannabis. So I don't exclude cannabis from the psychedelic conversation, but yoga does a lot of things. When I say yoga, I'm really talking about the practice that includes postures, breathing, meditation, moving exercises, focusing on different energy centers in the body, and also, if you will, rules of behavior, living a good life, being an honest person, all of that as inclusive in yoga. And I would like to say that my take, and this does come from 50 years of daily practice, except for a few times when I've either been sleeping on a boat in the Amazon or with too many natives in a shack, and it's just not possible to do it. Um, that yoga, I don't think that we actually choose yoga. I think that yoga chooses us. I think that yoga is a wisdom current that runs through human history. If you look at images of Shiva, the god Shiva, from whom yoga supposedly derives, he has a top knot of his hair, and coming out of that is a river, and that is the holy Ganges River. But it's also the twin currents of yoga and cannabis, both of which Shiva, at least ostensibly, gave to humanity so that humanity could experience ecstasy and oneness with the gods, if you will. Um, and yoga practice does a number of things. It cleanses the body somewhat. It strengthens the nervous system. It makes us much, much more keenly aware from a sensory standpoint, so that all of the senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, feel, they're all just kind of working a little bit more keenly, or a lot more keenly. And it makes us more attuned to energy. And when we are in the psychedelic space, let's say we've taken mushrooms, or we've had ayahuasca, things can get kind of woolly out there. And, it gets, if you really go beyond a sort of a threshold dose, there's the whole ego flattening experience. And there are phenomena that occur that can be startling, hyper energizing, um, any number of things. Anything can happen in the psychedelic landscape. And having a stronger nervous system, and yoga practice really is about the nervous system. It's about using this whole neural network, our brain, our central nervous system, our peripheral nervous system, so that we convey energy throughout us at all times. At any point in time, what is it? I think each single gene, or no, each single neuron in our brain, and we have about 100 billion of them, conveys something like 0.007 volts of energy. If you add up all of the energy that is going on in the human body, in the brain, and in the central nervous system, and in the peripheral nervous system at all times, and you add up the energy that's going on in all the cells, the mitochondria of our cells that are creating burning energy, it adds up to millions of volts at any one time. So we are actually carrying this massive charge. And what happens often in the psychedelic space is that charge comes on really strong. We become hyper amplified. We become hypersensitized. Sometimes that's scary. Sometimes it's overwhelming. And there are many things that we learn in yoga that can help. For example, if something's really, really overwhelming, breathe through it. Breathe through it. The breath is always our friend. Breathe through that in times of fear, in times of high stress, in times of psychedelic anxiety, not hyperventilating, not breathing rapidly, but deeply and slowly and calming and sending that energy out. That is a method that will help almost anybody in the psychedelic landscape at some point or another. The other thing that we learn in yoga practice, especially when we become adept at deep relaxation, when we lie in Shavasana on our backs with our legs uncrossed, our arms by the sides, our palms up, and we go into deep relaxation, and we systematically let go of muscular tension and tension in our eyeballs and in our faces, and we just let it go. This can save your life in the psychedelic space. I have had times when I've been so completely gobsmacked by energy, just so ripped to the eyeballs with it, that I've gotten onto, in the case of being in an ayahuasca maloka, I've gotten onto the floor, on the wood, on my back, in Shavasana, and just let it go. Let it all go. And let that energy flow more unimpeded and steadily through me. And this is something that, if in times of super high intensity in the psychedelic space, if you can allow yourself to relax by letting go of everything, basically surrendering, this will serve you very well. My first biggest experience with that dimension of surrender, which I really, really learned thanks to a lot of meditation over the years, came on my very second ayahuasca experience, when I found myself on my back, um, being energized, if you will, by a giant psychedelic anaconda that hovered over me and that was pounding my chest with energy so hard, I really truly thought I was going to have cracked ribs at the end of the evening. And there was absolutely no escaping this force. In fact, the anaconda was saying things to me. So, do you think that you're in charge here? I'd be like, no, 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 no. I'm definitely not in charge, you know. So, do you think you can get up? And I'm like, there's just no way I can get up. And this went on for a while. And I realized that I was either going to have a really terrible, bumpy, bad ride, uh, hanging on as I was being pummeled with this energy, or I could just surrender and let go, because in any case, I was stuck there. I was there. This was happening. And once I really determined to let go, the anaconda did not stop. The energy did not stop. The merciless beating of my chest did not stop. But my acceptance of it just opened me up. And eventually, after a couple hours of that extreme energizing, heart chakra, massage, um, I was feeling terrific. So the yoga really saw me through. And also, I think that there are things that happen in the psychedelic landscape and in the psychedelic experience where we get sudden energy moving through us. And if we have a yoga practice, if we have a meditation practice, then without a lot of force and without a lot of control, we can direct that a bit. So we can navigate our way through something. I mean, you might find yourself in a very crowded landscape of weird beings. That's happened to me in ayahuasca. And I just kind of want to move through them. And having the capacity to sort of hook up to my third eye and focus and go forward has also been of inestimable value. So, in answer to your question, Shannon, these are some of the ways that a good yoga practice, a good meditation practice, and I do consider them one and the same, can help us in the psychedelic landscape. And also, I do believe that because yoga and meditation are fundamentally contemplative self-awareness practices, that after the psychedelic experience, whatever that might be, those same practices also give us exceptionally fine tools for integration.
Absolutely, Chris. And I especially like what you said about letting go, because that's something, that can be used both with psychedelic practice and with medicine work, but also, in yoga, just letting go, that surrender, that acceptance. And it's a huge philosophy. I know in yoga is just accepting that. And that's usually when everything opens up to you. So we talked about how a yoga practice can help.
No, I
Sorry,
was
go
just
ahead.
going to say, if we do
Um,
fight the psychedelic experience, we have a bad experience.
yeah, exactly. And it's that letting go that I think in a way kind of helps you go deeper into those lessons. So we talked about how yoga can help you navigate the psychedelic landscape. If we flip it around, how can psychedelics help you navigate or, help you practice meditation and yoga
Well,
or go
I
deeper
think
into it?
I like to use the word refreshment with psychedelics. I do believe that we can be spiritually refreshed and renewed and cleansed and energized and opened up by psychedelics in a way that is harder, certainly not impossible, but harder to do with daily yoga practice, daily meditation practice. And I think about the combination of them this way. I've had a half century to work this out. So, I've gotten to experiment a lot with this. Um, when we practice yoga and meditation as a daily thing, we develop a rhythm. And what happens, and what I've seen happen to many people who have long and enduring practices, is that we become more aware in a kind of a gradual way. And we may have events, for example, spiritual experiences, out of body experiences, Kundalini awakenings, chakra openings, third eye visions, all of that. We may have that as a result of practice. But in general, it's typically a steady and gradual thing. When you drop that into, when you can drop into a psychedelic experience, whatever the psychedelic is that really turns you on, or the psychedelics that really turn you on, if it's plural, um, that is a hyper amplified circumstance. It's kind of like going from 50 watts to 10,000 watts. Everything is bigger, everything is larger. And as relates to meditation, when we practice meditation and we practice yoga, we do, in fact, press is kind of the wrong word, but our regular habitual neural pathways kind of are lowered for a time, and we sprout new ones, which means that we have more options in terms of how we react to things, how we relate to things, the experience that we have as we move through the world. When we do psychedelics, we know that this is exactly what happens, that we open up many, many more neural networks. And we've especially seen that in neural imaging of people taking mushrooms, for example, just hundreds of new neural networks arising. And this gives us greater freedom of choice. So I like to think of yoga practice as steady and consistent and delivering benefits and payouts every single day of practice, for sure. And sometimes remarkably so. But then when we do an ayahuasca ceremony, when we take mushrooms in the woods, when we go to a peyote ceremony, or we drink San Pedro and hang out by a bonfire, whatever we're doing, um, that gives this extra refreshing experience, this extra vivifying experience that gives a boost to yoga. It actually inspires us. So many people come away from these experiences inspired. And the thing is that the mystical experience, if you will, that so many people have on psychedelics is the same mystical experience that people from all different religious and spiritual backgrounds talk about. The experience of, not the idea of, not the thought of, but the actual experience of complete oneness with all things, of everything being interconnected, of all being one, and us being completely inseparable from the entire universe and all of that in us. When we have that experience, that's this intense, powerful, amplified experience. When we can carry that realization back into our yoga practice, that also gives us extra fuel, extra psychic gasoline to go on for a time. So, to my satisfaction, yoga and meditation and periodic dives into the deep end of the psychedelic pool are a very good combination if you are suited for that, and not everybody is. Um, One thing I want to remind everybody of is that what we call traditions are circumstances or practices or ideas that at some point back when people made up. People say, hey, listen, this is great. You block your right nostril and you just breathe through your left and you get really relaxed, and be like, yeah, that works. Okay. And eventually these things become more codified and more developed and extrapolated upon. But right now, what we're doing at this time, I've seen a lot of people in ayahuasca ceremonies who have yoga backgrounds, martial arts backgrounds, meditation backgrounds. They come from some integrative mind body experience and practice, because these two can and do enrich each other. So I like the synchrony of them together, and I do believe that we're creating a psychedelic yogic tradition as we go along.
You're absolutely right, Chris. And I'm just seeing in the chat that my volume might be a little bit too loud, so I'll try to talk a little bit quieter here so we can match our voices here. But if you guys want to turn up Chris, I will back off my microphone and maybe talk like this for the rest of the webinar, and we'll see if that works out okay. But in yoga, especially, I know that there are a lot of people who, do the practice, and they don't get to that, I don't know if you want to call it samadhi or enlightenment, but the stage of where they can realize or actually experience, you can't put it into words, but, actually experience the oneness and the connection. And then when they go into psychedelic work, they can experience that oneness through being able to like jump and peek over the fence and realize there's something greater than, what they personally experience at the moment. I think it definitely amplifies their yoga practice. Absolutely. So Kundalini is something that you mentioned, and Kundalini energy and the fusion of yoga and psychedelics. Can you talk to us a little bit about Kundalini? I know I read it in your book here, which is amazing. I have to say I've read too many yoga books, and yours definitely gives a really good overview. So if anyone's looking to learn more about yoga, this is definitely the book to pick up, because it's really good.
I'm happy to talk about Kundalini. I said earlier that I perceive yoga as a wisdom current that runs through humanity, and it runs through human history, and we tap into that. And we do so with the various practices that we call yoga. And that same current within us, that wisdom current, that essential spiritual current is known as Kundalini. And, physically, it resides at the very, very base of the spine and travels up the spine and illuminates the brain and extends beyond that and creates a beautiful, bright aura. That's what happens when Kundalini is fully lit up. And for most of us, Kundalini is not fully lit up. Most of us are not going to wind up sitting in samadhi for hours at a time. That is a hard won thing. I mean, I've had some, modest samadhi experiences over time, but it's hard to do, and it's especially hard to do in in an environment in which we're also earning a living and driving to do the errands and taking care of things that if you're meditating in a cave, you don't really have to deal with. Um, but the Kundalini energy and the awakening of that is a goal of yoga practice. The idea is that by summoning that energy up through the spine, opening up the centers of energy that we know as the chakras, which correspond to physical nerve plexuses that also go along the same route of the spine, that we wind up with greater energy, greater vitality, greater insight, greater spiritual perception, that sense of oneness, that sense of awe. Um, as this advances, this is where the yogic practice, the meditative practice, becomes very advanced, because then we really do go into those higher states. And it is possible, and I'm telling you this from experience, to have a Kundalini awakening right smack in the middle of a psychedelic experience, and to channel that, to have the presence of mind, thanks to practice, to sit, to concentrate on the energy, you don't really have to do anything other than pay attention to it. That's the beauty. Paying attention to the energy. You don't have to try to bring it up. You don't have to visualize bringing it up. If you sit with it in the psychedelic space, very often the Kundalini energy will just start to flow like a fountain. It can be overwhelming. It can be disorienting. Sometimes it's very weird to have a geyser of, extraordinary energy just charging up your spine. But most of the time, it's remarkably delightful and something that people appreciate for the inspiration that it gives them going forward. So what I think is that I recommend that anybody who is serious about yoga or meditation, anybody who wants to make these practices lifetime allies, that you practice a lot without being high, without doing psychedelics on top of them. Just practice. Just get your time in, get your chops in, get your practice down. There's no practice but practice. Nothing else is going to deliver you to the treasures of yoga. Nothing. Only practice will get us there. Um, but we can use, once we really have a good practice, we can use the psychedelic opportunity to kind of, give a little bit of a crowbar to opening up that lower chakra and getting that energy flowing. I've found it extraordinary. I've found it humbling. I've found it spectacular. I've found it awe-inspiring. And this is within people's reach. If we rely alone on yoga practice and on meditation practice, which I don't diss in any way, we may or may not have these more potent Kundalini experiences. But it certainly is possible to facilitate them more easily and to reap the benefits of them if we, as Humphrey Osmond said, add a pinch of psychedelic.
Absolutely, Chris. And definitely, I know practice is something that goes a long way in that. So do we want to, we have a few questions here that are starting in the chat. So did you want to move to that and we can answer a few questions? Okay, sounds great.
Yeah,
and I'll keep reminding myself here to, the first one we have is from Johnny. What are your thoughts on the similar experiences of ego dissolution with both psychedelics and meditation/mindfulness? So what are your thoughts on the similar experiences?
Yeah, ego dissolution is ego dissolution. There are people out there who insist that you should only have the experience through yoga and meditation. I don't agree with that. I think that as the old Tibetan scripture said, the yogi must know the medicines and the omens. I think that these medicines are available to us exactly to give us that boost, to give us that experience. Um, and while I certainly have on many occasions, a great many occasions, had the ego dissolving experience as a result of yoga practice and meditation without any entheogens, without any adjuncts of any kind, for sure it is easier if we also employ psychedelics. And I want to say something about this. There are so many ways to enjoy psychedelics. I mean, there's clearly nothing wrong with spending a beautiful day in a field doing mushrooms and playing frisbee and scratching the dog and having great conversations and laughing. And that is a beautiful thing. That is one of the things that the psychedelics are here for. It is also wonderful to engage in an intentional, thoughtful, ceremonial approach to the psychedelics and pay more attention and concentration on some of the things I've been talking about here, on energy flow, on opening up that way. But we have many ways at our disposal to enjoy the psychedelics, and I wouldn't want people to come away from this session thinking that my impression is it only must be ceremonial or solemn, because that's not where I come from at all. I mean, you know, I've enjoyed the wild, free, outdoors, dancing naked in the rain side of psychedelics as much as I've enjoyed the, sitting in lotus in the Maloka with my Kundalini up.
Absolutely. There's, like you said, many different ways to experiment there. So we have some questions here that came from social media. One is, you've had some really immersive experiences with unique cultures. What customs have you incorporated into your own daily practices?
I would say, I mean, in terms of customs, I don't know, but my life with indigenous people all around the world has made me spectacularly grateful for the opportunity, and led me to many wonderful experiences. I mean, if I think about something akin to the psychedelic experience, or akin to some of the realizations that can be had in yoga, I would have to say that my 6 years of firewalking in the South Pacific really were in perfect alignment with that. I mean, when you step into about a 33, 35-foot long pit of a roaring pit of fire, and red hot stones, and you go from one end to the other. Trust me when I tell you, you're not thinking about what you're going to have for lunch. Your mind goes absolutely, completely blank, in a way that you do in a deep and profound meditation. And it's just breathe, step, breathe, step, breathe, step, breathe, step. So I would say that, I also had an experience one time with some natives, when they invited me into a war dance that they had never done in public. And a chief encouraged me to dance with them. And when I got into this group of these powerful warriors, in seconds following what they were doing and doing it with them, I was in the most remarkable trance. And this energy just came roaring through. And it was strong and powerful and deep, and filled with antiquity and mystery. And I really got why they did this dance. It somehow plugged them right into their core energy, and loosened it up and let it go. And you could just imagine, in previous times in history, people doing this dance and being hyper infused with tremendous energy, and therefore being much more galvanized as they went into battle. I mean, I prefer to employ the energy for more peaceful means. But I would say that, being with indigenous people has given me extraordinary appreciation, which I also think that yoga and meditation do. Appreciation for all of life, appreciation for my good fortune. And then there have been experiences like the native dancing, like the fire walking, and like some other things that have been very curiously close to what I experience in the more profound moments with yoga practice.
We actually have that's actually our next question in regards to trance. It's from Kira. She says, is it true that through meditation, one can reach a trance-like psychedelic state?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I would say that through meditation, it's relatively easy. Um, and I don't necessarily mean lavish visions coming at you the way that happens when you've had, a high DMT ayahuasca. But for sure, as we yoga practice and meditation practice, while they are a great many things, they're also about developing voluntary controls. voluntary control of respiration, of heartbeat, of blood pressure, of brainwave activity, of temperature. All these things can be controlled, even though they're considered to be involuntary functions. And so as we go along in practice, we absolutely can have these deep and profound trance experiences, and after a time, you drop into that very quickly, very quickly, so that openness, that flow of energy in and out, that inseparability with things comes rather fast, actually. And that's why I advocate practice, because practice alone, and only practice and nothing but practice, will get us there.
Absolutely. So they're asking me to whisper in the chat. So
Okay.
I'm going to whisper to you the next question if it doesn't sound too weird. But we are dealing with psychedelics, so nothing's too weird. So the mention of to surrender or to accept is very common in modern day therapies. But sorry, I'm just laughing at my whispering here. But they're often difficult to grasp because these are processes and not simple actions we can take, like when someone tells us to raise your arm, for example. Do you think your experience of surrendering would have happened without the assistance of the psychedelic anaconda almost breaking your ribs? So do you think that your experience of surrendering would have happened without the assistance of the psychedelic anaconda almost breaking your ribs?
Well, no, I think that, I have a natural ability, thanks to yoga practice, to let go of tension, to let go of whatever I need to. I mean, I'm not suggesting that it's always easy, but it's always possible. And that I attribute to yoga practice, whether it's a psychedelic anaconda or a robotic figure with a tomato can head, or whatever I encounter out there in the landscape. Um, Surrender. I mean, think of it this way. Here's a really simple surrender. Get into a shower, turn on the warm water, let it pour down the back of your head and down your back, and stand there and space out and let go. And you'll find that there'll be periods of however long, maybe a minute or so, when you really won't be thinking anything. That is surrender. And surrendering in that situation, letting go in that situation, okay, that's admittedly rather easy. But as you develop the capacity to do that over and over and over and over and over and over again in yoga practice, like, if I'm in a certain posture, if I'm in cobra pose, if I'm in downward dog, if I'm in plow, if I'm in some sort of modified handstand, um, I ask myself, what don't I need to be holding tense right now? I go, well, I clearly don't need to be holding my leg tense right now in this particular position, and let it go. And as we become more practiced that way, then the surrender becomes easier and easier and easier. And while I am talking to a great extent about physical surrender, remember, we're spiritual beings living in physical bodies. When the physical life ends, this life ends. So this is what we've got. And we use our minds and our bodies, and we develop our minds and our bodies so that we can accommodate the needs of our spirit to be more free, to be more free flowing, to be more open, to be more energized, to be more expressive throughout everything we do in our lives. So I would say to you that learning to surrender, learning to let go, learning to allow these energies to flow is something that you can and you will develop almost with certainty if you maintain a decent practice.
Absolutely, and very good point there, Chris. So the next question is in regards to how yoga can be used for integration after a psychedelic journey? And what does integration work post-ceremony look like? And I'm not sure if that comment was specific to yoga or not. So if you want to talk about that.
I think that yoga helps us to have actually to develop some boundaries at the very same time that it helps us to expand ourselves beyond boundaries. And what I mean by that is that if we practice yoga and meditation, thoughtfully and regularly, the most likely scenario is that we will wind up being more thoughtful and considerate and aware overall. And when you come out of a psychedelic experience, um, the ability to take our reflective, self-aware selves to the topic of what we've experienced and make sense of it uh, is tremendously aided by practice because we have guidelines. I mean, many is the person who has had a psychedelic vision that has been messianic or overblown, in which they kind of come away thinking, they're the person to settle the world's ills or whatever. And if you practice yoga and meditation, on a thoughtful, regular basis, you understand that that's just the hyper amplification of the psychedelic experience talking. And if there's something to be garnered in that, if there's some mission, to also be a person who helps to deal with hunger, or to also be one of the many people that helps to serve the world in a certain way, without imagining ourselves to be greater than anyone else, anyone at all, that's where I think it can be helpful. I also think that, um, you know, integration, what it looks like to me in a lot of circumstances that I've been in, is really thoughtful conversation among people who not only have experienced a psychedelic event together, whatever that might be, but also respect each other's, if you will, tenderness or openness in the conversation that follows. And I do think that a lot of integration can be accomplished and is accomplished in conversations with people after psychedelics. I mean, maybe the day after. I don't mean you're coming down and you sit down and, kind of hash it all out, because you're still having the experience. But, this, again, traditions are things that people figure out, and then years later they're called traditions. We've created a new tradition of psychedelic journeying. It isn't necessarily so that in previous times, indigenous native people sat around in circles afterwards the next day and talked about their visions and what it meant, and how they resolved something bad that happened with their mother, or whatever guilt that they had over something. That's a Western thing, and it's a good one, but it's our new tradition. So I think that part of how integration looks, back to your question, is that thoughtful conversation among people. And if you have in that conversational group someone or someones who have a lot of experience with this, who have a lot of experience with the phenomena that arises in the psychedelic experience, the pains, the suffering, the things that get resolved or partially resolved in the psychedelic experience, then that person also can become a wise guide to help to, without too much of a heavy hand, to help to guide the conversation to its best and most life-affirming effect, if you will.
Absolutely. We have one other question here on Crowdcast, and then I have about 15 for you. And it's based upon the Shiva Two Rivers. Would you say one cannot attain the full benefits of yoga and or cannabis without using both in tandem?
No, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. I mean, I have a book coming out called The Lotus and the Bud in January, in which I talk entirely about the fusion of yoga and cannabis. So I'm certainly a fan, but I would not say that it's essential. No. I think that these things clearly go together through and back through antiquity, but not in all traditions. There are many traditions, in antiquity that don't combine these two. I think that the thoughtful combination of cannabis and yoga practice, excuse me, can be very valuable for something as simple as, um, relieving pain in practice, or something as profound as opening up the Kundalini energy. But I would not say that to derive the benefit of either one requires the other. I just think it's a wise combination when it's approached thoughtfully.
Absolutely. And just while you're on Kundalini there, I know in a lot of traditions, and you speak to this a little bit in your book on just being careful with Kundalini. There's some traditions that say, if you bring the Kundalini up too quickly and you don't have purity of body or purity of mind, it can cause mental turbulence, I guess might be a way to say it. Can you maybe speak a little bit to that and how it potentially relates to the psychedelic landscape as well?
Sure. In both the psychedelic experience and in the Kundalini experience, you can get the crap scared out of you. There's no question about it. There's a phenomenon widely known in the mysteries and often referred to in psychedelics as the dweller on the threshold. When you're going to go through the portal into the greater spiritual landscape, um, often there is some test, some beings, some energy, some fear, some force that is difficult to endure, that is hard to encounter, and we need to pass through that. And that is certainly true with Kundalini. Kundalini is utterly overwhelming at times. It's no joke. It's 50,000 watts going through you easily, and it can scare you silly. And that is one of the reasons that I say that yoga practice or meditation practice can help to prepare us to strengthen our nervous system, to really familiarize ourselves with allowing more energy to circulate through us in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming. Um, I mean, that's my basic answer, is that one certainly helps the other.
Absolutely. It's like doing the preparatory work in order to, have a clear channel so that you can receive that energy or channel that energy coming through. What would you say to someone who says, I don't have time for yoga or meditation?
Well, if a person doesn't have time for yoga and meditation and it doesn't bother them, then, what I would say is live your life. Just live your life, whatever your life is. I mean, clearly, you don't have to practice yoga or meditation to be a good person. Clearly, you don't have to practice yoga and meditation to be happy, because there are happy people who don't practice. Um, but I would say that if you have a desire to practice, then there has to be a 10-minute or 15-minute window someplace in your day that you can carve out, that you can set aside, where you can just be for you, where you can take in energy, where you can relax the stresses within you, when you can let go of things that you don't need, when you can support and strengthen your body and your mind and spirit. And my position is that enhances virtually any life. So of course I'm an advocate for practice, but if you don't have time for practice, if it's absolutely impossible, then certainly don't feel guilty about it. Just be a good person to the best extent that's possible for you, whatever that is.
It sounds so easy, hey? Just be a good person. It's so simple. We have a question here from Lisa. And she asks, Chris, how do you engage an individual in thoughtful conversation, especially someone who is opposed to psychedelic and plant medicine use?
Some people will not be persuaded. That's for sure. But what I have found, I like to call it, and I'm not the only one who says this, I like to call it carrying the medicine. When I first went down to the Amazon and drank ayahuasca, I had 6 nights, or actually the first time was just 3 nights. Um, it was to get over the grief from my mother's death. I had been grieving for entirely too long, and it was an unhealthy thing at that point. And a couple of months later at Thanksgiving dinner, I was talking with my family, and my uncle kind of liked to go around the table and say, "So, and what did you do this year?" You know, and he got to me, and I said, "Well, I just got back from the Amazon where I was drinking this psychedelic potion, you know, to get over the grief of mom's death." And there was this like kind of pause in the room. Um, but then, you know, there were a few questions, and the thing that mattered was that my family members saw that I wasn't suffering anymore, that I was happy, that I was relieved, that I was freed of a burden that had been really terrible for me. And that is what won the conversation. It wasn't any words that I used. It wasn't me trying to be influential or, you know, drag up some NLP skills. It was really about showing up, carrying the medicine. And they could see it. And they said, well, you know, and one said, well, we kind of really don't sort of understand that, but, you know, we're so glad that you're happy. And so what I think is that a lot of convincing people is just plain about carrying the medicine. Maybe you don't say so much all of the time. Maybe you just show up better integrated and happy and thriving and enjoying life more. And, you know, people are going to want to know, well, what the heck are you doing to be this way? And then, as the French say, cherchez le créneau, find the opening, then that's your opening. You can say, well, you know, I've been microdosing LSD, or you know, once a month I do magic mushrooms, and I found that, you know, my PTSD is gone and I'm a happier human being. And, you know, and no sell at all, just no sell. No, you ought to do this, none of that stuff. If you show up carrying the medicine, then many people who otherwise would not be persuaded just might be. But don't expect everybody to be. Biases are often very deeply graven in people's minds, and some people don't want even to allow themselves to consider that psychedelics could be useful or valuable, because for them just admitting that could be psychologically or emotionally very scary, and we have to respect that.
Absolutely, that's so important. In regards to a integration, doing the work, yoga, meditation, if you were to give, you know, one or two top tips to people here today on what they could do to bring that into their practice, what would your top 2, 3, 4, 5 tips be on that?
Well, if we have a joyful psychedelic experience, and I do understand that not every psychedelic experience is joyful, then what I would say is, as you go forward, conjure that joy, remember that joy. You know, so much of how we live has to do with remembrance. So if we have positive things, realizations, deeper understanding that happen in the psychedelic space, then conjuring that, remembering that, carrying that forward day by day can make a difference. You know, in psychedelics, as you know, some people have bad experiences. Some people have scary or terrifying experiences. And then the question is, um, what does that tell you afterwards? And it may tell you, wow, I've got a fear of losing control, or I've got a fear of going mad. Or, I mean, for some people, it's, hey, psychedelics just plain aren't right to me. I'm just too sensitive. And that's okay too. But I think that drawing upon whatever realizations we have, good or bad, and reflecting on those can be very valuable in carrying forward the medicine and also integrating better. One of the things about psychedelics is that when we have, let's say if we realize something or if we have a breakthrough, it's thorough. Nothing gets left behind. I mean, the psychedelic realization is in your toenails, no part gets left out. It's in your hair follicles. It's every single part of our being. We just have this immersive experience, whatever that is, good or bad. I think a lot of people have an experience of tremendous love and appreciation and gratitude for others in the psychedelic space. And if you can conjure that, especially if you can conjure that in all of the regular day-to-day, normal, nothing special kind of interactions that happen, that will elevate everything about how you live. Because if we can actually carry forward a greater sense of love, a greater sense of appreciation, a greater sense of gratitude, that's going to affect every moment of our day. And it's also going to have a positive and salutary influence on every interaction we have.
Sorry, I was delayed on the getting my mute off there, but I absolutely agree with that. We had a question come up here from Lisa, and it's in regards to a deprivation tank. She asks if a sensory deprivation tank will also help in preparing one for the journey.
I had the good fortune to do separate sensory deprivation tank, flotation tanks for many times when I lived in Los Angeles in the 80s. First time I got into the tank, I was floating like a cork on my back and I fell asleep and somebody woke me up an hour later and it was great. I had a good time. What I believe is that sensory deprivation tanks are an extraordinary invention. I can't recommend the experience highly enough. To be in water, a temperature that is equivalent to the temperature of your body, so you don't really have a sense of being in water, to have 800 pounds of salt in that water so that you float like a cork and can't possibly sink, and to let yourself go thoroughly and completely in that, it is a brilliant experience. And it is like going into a profoundly deep meditation or a profoundly deep trance. And I do believe that in terms of supporting or enhancing yoga practice or preparation for psychedelics, or is just part of the mix of the things that we do in our lives to keep ourselves whole and well. Uh, Sensory deprivation tanks are brilliant, and I really can't speak highly enough for them, actually.
Absolutely, and I definitely second that. As when we talk in yoga, we talk about pratyahara, which is actually withdrawal from the senses, right? And it's one of the preliminary steps before you can even go into a deeper meditation. So yeah, definitely something to try out there. So I do have a few other questions here, and this isn't so much about yoga and meditation, but I think it's an important question to ask. And comes from social media here. How can we change our culture in the West of treating illness with pharmaceuticals to healing with plant medicines? And do you think this is possible in specifically overcoming the opioid crisis in BC, Canada, that is claiming more lives in 2020 than ever before?
Well, I think that cultural changes happen slowly until there's some tipping point, if you will, and then they happen more quickly. When I started out in the herbal scene at a time when those of us involved with herbs, or those of us involved with botanical medicines, were referred to in the media as the fruits, nuts, and flakes. we were denigrated and ridiculed for a long time. And if you were involved in that kind of thing, you were considered weird, just plain weird. Like, why don't you get with the program? Why don't you use the modern stuff? It's proven, it works. Um, and what I think is that, I get people who ask me, well, what do you do for your health? And I tell them. And some wind up doing some of that. So I think it's kind of like showing up representing the medicine. Um, if we embrace plant medicines, if we, take a pass on the pharma model, if we don't reach for Xanax because we've got some stress, whatever that is, I think the more we become involved with plant medicines and the more we integrate those into our lives, um, that shows for some people. And some people say, well, what do you do for a cold? Or what do you do for this? Or what do you do for that? And if you say, well, when I get that kind of itchy skin, I do the following with turmeric or whatever the thing is. And this information, this knowledge, this sense of utilizing the beneficial medicines that nature has provided rather than reaching for a synthetic that may be toxic or potentially even lethal in some instances, uh, it spreads organically in the truest sense of the word. So I think of it a lot like showing up representing the medicine. In terms of helping with the opioid crisis, if a person can be in an immersive environment in which they can eat organic foods and breathe clean air and drink fresh, pure water and exercise and practice some yoga and doing some cleansing methods and taking certain, enlivening, rejuvenating, vivifying herbs. I do believe that plant medicines can, and they clearly have in many instances, help people through the opioid crisis. But I would also say that the way our social systems and structures are set up, um, that is admittedly very hard to accomplish at this point in time. But I do think a lot more people are turning, just as more people are turning to psychedelic therapies and having good success with those for addictions, that coupling that with a deeper dive into plant medicine for all purposes and also for food that really acts as a medicine to nourish and strengthen and cleanse us, I think it's a more dynamic program.
Absolutely. And you're super right about our systems. I know about some companies where, especially in the insurance industry, if you deviate from the pharmaceutical prescription and move into your own plant medicine, I believe they look at it as non-compliant. So, it's definitely, that's in Canada anyway, it's definitely kind of fighting the system a little bit in regards to that, which hopefully will change with this renaissance. Question here, what are the most accessible plant medicines for overall health that we can access in Canada and the US?
Well, I really like the adaptogens. The adaptogens are a class of herbs with which many of you might be familiar. Um, they enhance energy, endurance, and stamina. They help to reduce stress. They help you get a better night's sleep. They're very good for virtually every organ system in the body. So these include rhodiola rosea, which actually is cultivated in Alberta, Canada, actually, in addition to Siberia and Finland. But Panax ginseng, also another adaptogen. Ashwagandha, which is a root from India, from the Ayurvedic tradition. Schisandra berry, which is not to be confused with the kinds of berries that you'd have with yogurt and cereal, but instead a profoundly powerful medicinal berry. These are accessible, these are legal, these are great. You use them daily and they really do enhance vitality and they do make a difference in your life in terms of the positive experience you have. And I would also say, though, that cooking with ginger and using hot chilies and eating onions and garlic and making sure that you have turmeric root in your food, and all of these things are highly valuable as well. The idea is not so much what supplement can I take, but what lifestyle can I create that defends and protects and advances my health interests in all respects. So it extends beyond the herbs that we can take to the foods that we can eat, the juices that we can drink, and also many, many lousy, crappy, nutritionless, or toxic foods that we can avoid, so that we really can treat our bodies kind of like a temple.
Absolutely. Would you say that that also extends to, the energy that we surround ourselves with in regards to the company we keep and the media that we intake?
Well, the media is certainly often very toxic. I mean, we're living in a very chaotic time. And yeah, a lot of people take a media fast, and I don't think that that's such a bad idea. I've been doing that for decades when I've traveled, around the world investigating places. I often have no access to it. Now I've sort of been feeding excessively on it because I haven't been traveling since COVID-19 started. But yes, certainly, um, we become more aware that some people sadly are toxic. Not everybody does, in fact, have our best interests at heart, whether they know that or not. And, spending time with people that you love and who love you is far, far better for your soul and for your life than spending time with people that you don't care for and who don't like you at all. That's just a basic yes, of course. Um, spending time in and amongst people who shoot very low in terms of the bar that they set for themselves in life may prove to be very unsatisfying. Whereas if you're around people who set a bar very high, and I don't mean in an imperious or arrogant way, but in an inspiring way, um, those are people to be around. I mean, I've been inspired by many, many, many people, and I know that I've also at times inspired some too. And that's what we're supposed to do for each other, or at least I think that's what we're supposed to do for each other. So, yes, um, the atmosphere we're in, the company we keep, the activities in which we engage, the substances we take in, all of that makes a difference. And I don't mean you can't watch a great, mindless, stupid, fun action movie. There's nothing wrong with that. But what you don't want to have is a mindless action movie mentality about all of life.
hmm Speaking of COVID, we have a question here. How has this year's travel restrictions affected your work?
This year's travel restrictions have been a disaster for my work. I'm an explorer, and this has hurt me very badly, actually. Um, I came back from Vanuatu, South Pacific, where I was working with kava as I have over the past 25 years. Kava, a relaxing root that is also available in supplement form here and in Canada and other places. And basically, a few days after I got off the plane home, all international travel pretty much collapsed and the global pandemic was fully upon us. So for me, it's been very challenging. It has taken away something that I love dearly, that I do extremely well, and that has been profoundly satisfying in my life, and also uh, activities in which I can make a real difference in people's lives. When I go to indigenous native places and I help people with trade, and their circumstances improve and their nutrition improves, and their families do better and the schools have more supplies and their health, all of that stuff. This is what I love. So to suddenly find myself without that has frankly been a very good test of my yoga and meditation practice. um, it is easy to be high on life, when everything is going really, really well, when it's just like, yeah, it's in the pocket, you know? But it's much more challenging, and I think also much more educational to to some extent when we face tougher times. I mean, my hard times, my complaints are the complaints of the privileged. I don't get to travel as a global explorer right now. You know, I haven't lost my job. I haven't lost my home. I mean, I haven't, wound up being in some desperate circumstance. You know, my wife and I are in a lovely place, and we have friends, and we have a home, and we have food, and we're in actually very good condition. So it's certainly at the very same time that I have unquestionably wished that I could be back out on the medicine trail, it has also given me, without doubt, a greater sense of gratitude for what I have and what we have, and a strong wish that those who are suffering will have their suffering relieved sooner than later.
Mm-hmm. So we have one more question here, if we can squeeze it in. And it's about back to yoga, but in regards to emotions. So, how do you believe yoga impacts authentic emotional expression? Are there types of yoga that can over time allow you to convey deeper levels of expression within your felt emotions?
Okay. One of the things that we do see among some people who practice yoga and meditation, and I certainly was someone who did this in my earlier and more naive days of practice, was the kind of shutting down of emotions. Um, you know, a composed person isn't necessarily having those expressions. Well, that's nonsense. You know, emotions are things that we experience in our bodies that touch us in a variety of different ways, happy or sad. And the idea is to allow these emotions as part of who we are. You know, there's this river of consciousness constantly going through us, constantly going through us. Thoughts and feelings and ideas and inspirations and realizations and doubts and everything. It's just the great river running. And emotions are part of that. And if your emotions are out of control, if you find yourself reacting too strongly or suffering too much, then practice can be a soothing balm. The relief from that when you sit in meditation, let's say, and you just relax yourself into a deeper and more expansive trance state, this can be a lifesaver. When you are practicing yoga postures, you're working on your nervous system, you're stretching your nerves. And nerves are like piano wires. They don't stretch much, but they do stretch. And when we do that and we breathe and we empower our nervous systems, that can also help over time to bring us into somewhat better or maybe even much better emotional balance. I think that emotional balance in modern society, when we have the obligations and responsibilities and complications that we have, and especially now during COVID-19, um, it is critically important for us to be able to simultaneously feel emotions as they arise, and also to fashion our lives such that we're not completely led by and helpless in the face of our emotions. So it's a constant play, it's a constant awareness. And, you know, I'm always wary of the spiritual teacher who acts too perfect. And I'm unquestionably wary of the spiritual teacher who acts too mystical. Every single one of us has thoughts and feelings. there are about like 3 really enlightened people in the world, and the rest of us are on the bus. Okay. so so we we use practice to give us some direction and trajectory, even though the end result is directionless and has no trajectory at all. We use the methods and the forms and the structure to get to the methodless and the unformed and the unstructured. And hopefully, also the very, very joyful as well. Because ultimately, being happy beings, living as joyfully as we can within the realities of being spiritual beings in physical bodies, this is a high calling. We do not want to suffer if we don't have to. And so allowing our emotions to flow on the one hand um, keeps us from being pent up, and at the same time learning to fashion and soften those emotions if they're runaway horses helps us to lead lives that are just more integrated and harmonious.
I definitely second that. And thank you so much for sharing that. So we're almost at time here. Do you have any final words that you would like to leave us with?
Certainly. Well, first of all, I appreciate all of you being here this evening. I never take it for granted when people take the time out of a busy schedule to do something like this. Um, Yoga is not a competitive thing. Meditation is not a competitive thing. And psychedelics, hopefully, are not competitive. Although, Lord knows, there are people out there who say, I've done 578 acid trips. Okay, fine. I'm not going to compete with that, actually. Um, you know, we, we all practice and we all have our psychedelic experiences at whatever is our edge. Um, whether you're flexible, you're not flexible, you're skinny, you're fat, you're young, you're old, you're male, you're female, whatever it is, the who we are, the who we bring to these things, that's where our practice is. And what somebody else is doing, what somebody else is experiencing, what their edge is, that's their practice. The whole idea as we move along together as one humanity is to find our points of connection. And points of connection are best when they're founded on kindness and understanding and consideration and a desire for all living beings to do better.
That's so important. And thank you for those words. Kindness. All we have to do is just be kind to one another. And it's so easy, but so not, right? Well, thank you so much again, Chris, for being here with us. It's always good to have us, and we definitely appreciate that. And I know we would definitely love to have you back again sometime. So thank you for sharing your wisdom on both yoga, meditation, as well as psychedelics and how they can work together in this world we're in.
Sure. And if people get a chance to go check out medicinehunter.com, which is my website, and there's way too much stuff there. I mean, I get lost there, but there's a lot of information on plant medicines, a lot of information on ayahuasca specifically, some information on yoga, and hundreds of links to TV programs and videos. So there's some entertainment there as well. medicinehunter.com. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Chris. And we'll make sure and put that link in the chat so people can go to it and read this book. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a good read. So thank you so much again, Chris.
Bless you all. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So just to close off the session here, I would like to give another big thank you to our speaker today, Chris Kilham. And thank you for everyone for being so understanding with any of our technical ups and downs. It's all part of the program. So we really appreciate everyone sticking around and being so kind and patient with that. So thank you. I also want to say thank you to our volunteers behind the scene who help out with the webinar series, and thank you to every one of you for showing up each episode and coming back to hear about the psychedelic renaissance. Special thanks to all of our speakers, past, present, and future. And our next episode will be on October 13th with Kevin Simpson. So make sure and tune in to that. As mentioned, research to make these medicines legal for use in therapy costs millions of dollars. So if at any time you'd like to make a donation, we do also have a fundraiser page set up for that. And we'll put the link in the chat as well as Chris's link. So make sure and check out his website as well. So thank you to everyone for attending, and we will see you on the next episode. Good night.